Well, good morning, church. It's very exciting. I was actually looking at the last time I was up here, and I realized it's been about 2 years, and I preached about Jonah using all the Playmobil that I had, which was fantastic. And since then, a whole lot of new people who are here. So you may not. I should probably introduce myself. So my name is Brad. You might see me as that person who arrives with a backpack filled with Playmobil for my own children, but I haven't really. They grew up a lot faster than I was prepared for, and so I'm still that guy carrying toys, and now instead they are generously sharing them around with the amazing new children that we've got here. Here we go. Here's the brief slide. If you want a preview of our last Jonah slide, I wish I could redo that one. I loved pulling that together actually. But the point is, I like to think in stories. I love stories. I've been telling stories to my children since they were small, and I haven't stopped. And so I want to just tell you a bit of my own story. So, as was been said, we've been working through a series about salt and light in the world, and how the gospel reaches the ordinary places, not just the obvious ones, but into spreadsheets, into Teams calls, emails, and the mysterious things that people do in offices all day. Which brings a bit of an aside. I wasn't sure if I'd put it in here, but I will. I don't know if anybody's ever read the book What People Do All Day. It's possibly one of the best children's books possible. And as a kid, everything seemed a lot simpler then. It was all the jobs were nice and clear-cut. You knew exactly what you were doing. Whereas in my office, the jobs make a whole lot less sense. They're a lot less clear-cut. My job is pensions proposition manager, which if you tell a 3 or 4-year-old you're a pensions proposition manager, they give you a very clear blank look. It is just the way it is. And actually, when my kids were younger, I used to cycle to work every single day. And at lunchtime, I'd go to the park for a workout. I'd maybe climb a rope or do pull-ups or something like that. And occasionally, Est would bring the kids to come and see me in the park. And I think they genuinely believed that was my job, that I would ride my bike to the park, I'd climb a rope, and then after that, I'd come home. And if I'm honest, if you are 3 or 4, that probably makes more sense than what I actually do, which is just sending emails. So you're just sitting there staring at a screen all day, and they pay you for that? That seems strange. So last week, Martin spoke about the radical reach of the gospel, about its soul-satisfying nature, its challenging truth, its beauty, and its overflowing impact. And I'm disappointed he's not here because I wanted him to see that I actually took notes. So this is kind of like when the teacher's away and you're like, well, I actually did my homework, so it's a bit of a waste of time now. So today, I want to show you what that looks like on a Wednesday afternoon in the office. Now, for me, in my case, that would be playing five-a-side football in the sports hall, which is also where you'll suspect I don't actually do a lot of actual work, but that's an aside. So I want to tell you my story about sharing the gospel in my workplace. So looking back, the theme that runs through it is seizing opportunities and trusting God to work through my imperfections. One of which being I didn't actually have in between slides, so I forgot about that, so you might be staring at that. I don't know what my next one is, but if I have blank slides in between. So my story starts about 7 years ago. I've been part of the Christian network in my work for a long time. There were about maybe 10 of us, and we'd meet once a week to pray and do a Bible study, and we've been doing that for about a decade. And over time, though, we became more and more hidden away. People retired, people moved jobs, and no new people seemed to join. Eventually, there were just a few of us left. Then one day, a contractor came into the company, a man called Malcolm, and he wanted to find the Christian network. So first he searched the building looking for any posters that might mention there was a Christian network. Then he started asking random people, do you know if there's a Christian group here? He just expected there might be. And this went on for a while until someone said, I think there's a guy with a cross on his desk. That guy was not me. But that guy did know me, and he occasionally came along to our group. And so all of a sudden Malcolm started coming to our meetings. And it was like a spark being lit. We started to dream again, and we decided to run an alpha course, which was fantastic. And I invited absolutely everyone I could. I twisted their arms. Anybody who'd shown even a flicker of interest in fitness or anything else, a few of them came along out of pity. And so all of a sudden, that's normally what happens. Now, all of a sudden, a lot of the Christians who were in the building, they came up because they wanted to help. And so they were helping cater it. We were running this Alpha course. It was fantastic. And then lockdown hit. And all of a sudden, everything had to go online. And it was a crazy time. I still wanted to continue running our Alpha course, but HR came in and they were not keen on promoting one faith over any other faith or anything like that. And so in order to keep running my Alpha, I had to help people from other faiths set up their faith networks just to keep going. So I helped set up I found a friend who was a Muslim and I said, you need to set up a faith network. I need you to do this. Found somebody who was an atheist. You need to do this. I need a Hindu. Okay, I've got enough. That's fine. Okay. And so I was able to get my Alpha course up and running again, and it worked. And I even invited the leads from the atheist network and the Muslim network along, and they came to that Alpha course, and we learned a huge amount from each other. They didn't become Christians, but they actually did become my friends, which was amazing. And over time, helping coordinate these different faith groups led to something completely unexpected. I ended up being invited, along with a bunch of other faith leads from different companies, to 10 Downing Street to talk to the International Panel of Parliamentarians for Freedom of Religion or Belief. I do have a slide. There we go. I actually, obviously I had to do a handstand as well. So, and it was about how people in workplaces could have more freedom for belief. And so it was really important. The experience taught me something really profound, that God works through both our compromises as well as our convictions. That when you trust that God's already at work, your role shifts from trying to control the outcomes to just creating space for connection. Now, I also want to mention an absolutely incredible charity called Transform Work. So they exist to connect Christians across workplaces. It's kind of like a quiet web of faith threaded through the corporate world. Their vision is so beautifully simple. Hold on, I think I've got this. Yeah. Their vision is so beautifully simple. They keep a list of Christian network contact leads across as many workplaces as they have. And if you join a new company, you can look up and find an email contact for somebody so you can get connected with other Christians in your workplace. Absolutely incredible. It is a small thing, but it absolutely changes everything. If you have a phone, you can do one of those QR codes or just type in Transform Work. Please do check them out. They have been absolutely amazing in supporting me, and they are constantly helping people navigate HR, do those things to be able to set up Christian networks in their own workplaces. And you might even be able to discover some Christians in your own workplace that might be there that you didn't know about. Or, if there aren't any, it could be a prompt for you to be that person who sets something up in your own workplace. So, that is the big story, the one about how faith and Christian networks have come alive in my workplace. But honestly, I don't think any of that matters if it doesn't come down to real connection, real human encounters. Those awkward, fascinating, sometimes transformative conversations that happen over coffee when you maybe stay too late in the office. So far, I've told you a little bit about structures and networks, but I want to bring it down to the personal. So what does that actually look like to talk about faith in the workplace? Well, how do you even begin? Well, here's the thing. I usually don't, or not in the way you might think. So, because there is no point talking about Jesus, faith, or the spiritual realm if we aren't even speaking the same language, if we don't understand each other. So, a few weeks or so ago, I was in the office later than usual because a few of the graduates were still around, and I got chatting to one of them about AI. Because if you know me, that's all I talk about. And I'm very sorry for all of you who've had to endure me droning on about... I get obsessed with everything, and then I go down to a rabbit hole. But I was talking to them about that, and this time the conversation drifted towards politics. So again, I'm that guy who talks about religion and politics in the workplace. It's bad. But this guy was struggling to understand his friend who held very different political views. And that's why I introduced him to something that I'd call magic philosophy words. And these are kind of words that help us make sense of one another. Look, I even have a slide for this one as well. Magic philosophy words. But these are the kinds of words that help us make sense of one another. They help us realize that even when two people are both speaking English, Sometimes they're actually speaking completely different languages. So I introduced one word, which is worldview. So I explained how two people might look at the same world but see it through a completely different lens. So some hold what you might call a closed worldview, the belief that the material world is all that exists. So the technical term for this is materialism or naturalism. And others, like me, and I imagine quite a few here, hold an open worldview, what theologians call spiritual realism. We believe that there's more than we can see or measure, that the spiritual realm is real and that God is active in the world. So these are two completely different worldviews. Now, if you have a closed worldview, then anything supernatural is impossible by definition. So no amount of evidence for miracles or answered prayer will ever land, because it's not just that you don't believe in God, it's that your framework doesn't allow him to even exist. So the next magic word I introduced was about truth. It's whether we see it as fixed or fluid. Some people believe in a moral law. Something outside of us shapes us. Now, others live by what I'd call a moral mood, that what feels right depends on the context, which changes from culture to culture. So for me as a Christian, truth isn't something that we invent, it's something that we discover. And but in a lot of today's thinking, truth is seen as something that we construct together. It's a social product that you slowly work through, and it bends and flexes with the age. And when you start to understand that which world somebody lives in, whether it's open or closed, fixed or fluid, you start to understand that a conversation about faith can feel like you're talking across a huge canyon. You're talking across each other. You don't understand. So anyway, as the conversation went on, we started talking about evil. Again, normal workplace conversation, I guess. What it is, whether it's real or not, and whether it's just a name for something we dislike. And at each point, I wasn't trying to win an argument. I just wanted to understand where he was coming from. So I'd say things like, well, as a Christian, I think evil looks like this. What about you? Or I might say, well, what's your faith background? How has that led you to this? What do you believe? And something beautiful happened. So there was another graduate there and who'd been standing nearby. And she'd actually grabbed her coat at the beginning of that conversation. And halfway through, because I talk a lot, I'm very sorry, I realized I'd been talking a long time. And I just said, oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to keep you. And she said, no, it's fine. This can wait. And she was just hungry for something deeper to talk about. Both of them were. People want that depth of conversation. They want to think about deeper things. As much as people love thinking about spreadsheets, people actually want to talk about things that matter. And at one point he asked me, aren't you just trying to convert me? And I said, no, I'm not trying to convert you, and I'm not. I want you to wrestle with faith. And I believe that I want you to wrestle with God, or even just with the idea of God. And I told him that the name Israel literally means to wrestle with God. That we, as Christians, should be wrestling with this. It is not a passive thing. Which is also why I started a wrestling club on Mondays, though that is another story. And I've come to believe I actually did. I've come to believe that my task isn't to argue people into the kingdom, but it's to help them to notice that God is already speaking to them. To awaken the possibility that the world is enchanted, that there's more going on. Because if this is all that's here, you can't see that there could be any sort of wonder, enchantment. You just need to be curious, to actually care about the person in front of you, and to trust that God's already ahead of you in the conversation. Most people do not need preaching. They need permission to wonder. And here's the secret. If you start asking spiritual questions so that you can convert somebody, it doesn't work. People can see through that a mile off, and it's horrible. We've all felt that same thing. But if you're genuinely curious, if you really want to understand what they think and why they think it, and they may never ask what you think, but if you actually want to understand that other person, well, that's when the Holy Spirit does his work. You don't need to do the next bit. So in that conversation, my goal was not conversion, it was connection. It was to understand and hopefully, in the process, to make a new friend. Nothing more, just to make a friend. So far, you might be getting a sense of how I work. And for anyone who's spent any time with me, you know that I'm pretty chaotic in how I work. And my kids will say I'm very, very chaotic in how I work. I start about 10 different jobs. Well, actually, more accurately, I start in the middle of about 10 different jobs. So a typical morning for me might be, okay, I'll do the laundry and I'll grab the basket of laundry. Then I'll maybe get to the top of the stairs and I'll see a head torch I left there upstairs. I'll grab that, take that downstairs. Then I'll realize, oh, I didn't make lunch. I'll cut the bread for the lunch. And I'll realize, oh, I was doing laundry. So I'll get the dryer lint, clear that out, say, oh, I was going to have a coffee. And I'll put the kettle on. Now, importantly, for me at least, each of these jobs is further along than when I started. But according to some people in my household, I've half started a whole lot of jobs and not finished any of them. What they miss, though, is the laundry is now at the top of the stairs, way closer than where it was. The bread is cut for when I want to make sandwiches. The kettle is boiled when I want that coffee. And the dryer is ready for somebody to push the button to turn it on. All of these things are much closer than they were before. It isn't pretty, but it actually moves things forward. And oddly enough, I think that's a little bit how the gospel actually works. That it's moved in little chunks and not huge things. So this approach, what others, like my manager, might call disorganized, I've come to see as the way that God works both in my life and the Christian life. So my calling isn't necessarily to complete every plan, but it's to create the space where God can move. So a perfect example of this is, about a year and a half ago, I thought it would be a great idea to start a weekly online prayer meeting so that we could pray for our leaders in my office and pray for each other. I sent an invite to the group, invited everybody, and almost immediately, a brand new colleague, Mbiri, she reached out. She'd just joined the company. She was so excited by this idea of prayer, and she said, maybe I could help in some way. I said, that'd be fantastic. And she'd asked her manager especially, could I have a half hour off the phones to do this? She booked a room. She was ready. And then somehow, as tends to happen, I somehow became important at work, and it's the worst thing that can happen. All of a sudden, I was pulled in, my work life exploded, emergencies multiplied, I was pulled into everything. I actually managed maybe 2 of these prayer sessions before I was pulled into other stuff, and I didn't actually get to go along. But Mbiri, she was faithful. Week after week, she turned up, a few others joined her, prayer requests filled the chat, and then, months later, some new sparks arrived. So people with that same passion. My friend Uchi, he'd come from HSBC, where their Christian networks now celebrates 50 years. And they'd had a huge international prayer meeting, and he brought that heritage with him. And when he came, it reignited what was already there, and the number of people quadrupled. It just exploded, and the atmosphere changed. I hadn't actually built a structure. I'd simply just created a bit of space. And in that space, God's built something more enduring. It's just amazing. And this often happens. I'll start something only to find others are the ones to actually carry it forward. Sometimes, often, far better than I ever could. And I've come to believe this is God's pattern with me. It's as though he watches me start in the middle in a chaotic, unorganized way and says, oh, okay, I can work with that. So another recent example that happened. So I invited somebody named Tim Silk. So he was the vicar at Pippin J's in Bristol. And he now works as a Christian business coach. He helps Christians in business to fully integrate their faith and their work life. Absolutely amazing. So he spoke to me, and I'm like, oh, this sounds like a great opportunity. Would you like to speak at my work? And I didn't actually have a fully fleshed out plan for what would happen. I just kind of had a sense this would probably work in some way. Not really planned out fully. But as we started, Tim suggested this would probably be easier if we actually modeled what that coaching process looked like. And he asked for a volunteer. And out of nowhere, Laura, who had left the company 4 years ago, 4 years earlier, and she'd actually helped me on the original Alpha course, she'd raised her hand. She spoke about her vulnerability of having returned to work after having a child, and she was training for the priesthood at the same time. And she talked about this pain and vulnerability, and it was phenomenal, deeply human, spiritually alive, and God turned up in that. We had 50 or 60 people sharing, and it was amazing. Unplanned, my chaos was used by God against any of my organization. I'd done what I could. I'd helped create the space. I'd given permission, and God did the rest. And I think this is how faith looks like in the workplace. It's not about mastery or precision. It's about trusting the Spirit to fill the gaps that we leave open. So for me, it's often the chaos that creates that space, because it means I can't pretend to be in control. My weakness becomes that invitation. And that's the strange upside-down world of grace. God seems to prefer working through the unfinished. Of course, that could just be me trying to find a spiritual rationalization for being disorganized, but I'm going to believe in a loving God. So, thinking back to Martin's sermon last week, for anybody who wasn't here, he talked about the radical reach of the gospel, how it finds us where we are, and how it binds us together. I think of Malcolm wandering the corridors to try and find our hidden Christian network. Small, almost invisible community. But that's the soul-satisfying nature of the gospel. It shows up in these small communities, in ordinary workplaces, in conversations that linger way after the end. And when it does, something overflows. And that's what I've seen again and again. Faith spilling beyond its boundaries, showing up when nobody expected it. And that's one of the great privileges for me of leading a Christian network in a secular setting. It forces you to strip faith down to its very core. There is no space for denominational walls. In our group, we have people from every corner of the Christian world. So we have ultra-conservative to ultra-liberal, ultra-charismatic to highly liturgical. We have Catholics, Orthodox, Protestants, and a few who've left the church entirely and have just enough faith to come along to one of our sessions, but nothing more. And because, as cliche as it sounds, the church isn't a building, it's the people. And as a company built around money and profit, somehow I think we found something deeper. And when we pray together, when we share burdens, when we encourage one another, that is church. It doesn't matter where it happens. So I think back to a call the other day, somebody I hadn't seen in 3 years. I didn't know why I hadn't seen them. And she poured out her grief. She'd had massive loss. She'd been through horrible suffering and pain. And I was welling up in the office, and I was in a meeting room, but actually Jesus showed up in that space. That's church in that space. That's that caring for somebody. I've made some of my closest friends through this network. One of them, my Catholic colleague Graham. Through countless conversations, we've kind of gently dismantled a lot of the myths that we held about each other's traditions. He's challenged and sharpened my faith, and I'm so grateful for that. And it's humbling to realize that in this secular workplace, we've somehow stumbled into maybe deeper unity than the church has managed for centuries. So the church has been divided for more than 1,000 years. First, between the East and the West, with the Great Schism of 1054, and then again 500 years later with the Reformation. But in my office, we don't have room for those divides. We leave them at the door. And these differing beliefs, they aren't just philosophical puzzles. They shape how we see one another. But when I step back, I realize that our differences feel very small beside that way bigger story that we share. So for 2,000 years, the church has wrestled with that diversity of mind and heart. So we're not the first to face it. And I think there's something really beautiful about that setting aside, something profoundly Christian. So the strange thing is, in the middle of that messy joy, I actually sometimes wonder whether, in my workplace, a lot of these diversity networks, even the faith-based ones, they risk putting us into tiny, tight boxes. They highlight our differences so sharply that we forget how we actually stand shoulder to shoulder with other people. So my Catholic friend, the one I mentioned earlier, Graham, he leads a choir in our London office, and he says it is the most unifying thing possible. Absolutely everybody's welcome, and all you have to do is sing. Just one voice coming together, like a picture of harmony, literally and spiritually. That five-a-side football group, not set up by Christians, not Christian in any way, but a bunch of people coming together. You've got light shirts on, you've got dark shirts, you're on that side. we're not keeping score. That playing football together, that joy, that connection, that laughter, that's a picture that's Christ-like. I've got a friend at work, Dammy. He's a Christian, and he felt compelled. He started a badminton club, and it is full all the time. Again, this sounds like I do a lot of play in my workplace, but he started this badminton club, and it's full, and it's transformative. The office feels changed, and it's filled with grace, connection. People are coming together. He's using his gifts for that. And then there's Lee, one of our receptionists, possibly the most enthusiastic person I've ever met, which is, I thought it was me, and then I find out it might be him. He is constantly winning awards for his attitude. He has transformed our office, just this one person who is overwhelmingly positive, and he knows everybody's name, he remembers all their stories, he greets them with this radiant smile, he's over the top, and when I mentioned wrestling club, he said, yeah, I'll give it a go. Then, like all of us over 40, he gets injured, so he stopped, But what's striking about Lee is that his love for Jesus just spills out. He can't help it. It never feels forced. It's just who he is. His faith is so full that people can't help feeling uplifted around him. He perfectly embodies something that I say all the time. You don't have to, you get to. So a few weeks ago, I hosted a conversation with our chief group actuary, which is a very senior role, and I wanted to talk to him about balancing senior leadership with his faith. We had a fantastic conversation. A whole bunch of people joined virtually and online. And we had a Q&A at the end. And one of the people asked, but how do you actually talk about faith? They said, I go to church every week, but it doesn't feel natural to kind of mention when people ask on Monday what you did over the weekend. And he actually deferred to me to answer this one. And I pointed to Lee as an example. I said, well, you don't naturally talk about something that doesn't excite you. But when your faith comes alive, when it fills you with joy, it becomes impossible not to share. And then I told her about Bridge Tots, where there's some people out there, which I've been helping for the last year. It is chaotic, hilarious, and it is deeply life-giving. It is so exciting that you hear so many quotes, so many funny stories from these people that I can't help but tell people about it on Monday, that I'm excited about that it's fantastic. Each of us has something that God is stirring in us, something that's both scary and exciting. So for me, right now, standing here is that scary, exciting thing. I'm a bit scared, a bit nervous, and I'll probably tell some people on Monday, I was preaching on Sunday, a bit anxious, and all of that. And when I think back to my Playmobil Jonah sermon, there we go. That was my placeholder. That's the placeholder I was supposed to use. But when I think back to that Playmobil Jonah sermon that I did 2 years ago, I realized that I've never really stopped telling the same story. Jonah tried to run from God, and God met him in the most unexpected places. In the storm, in the belly of the fish, in that foreign city that he didn't want to love. Now my workplace has become my own Nineveh. It's not hostile, but it's ordinary, sometimes a bit boring, and therefore really easy to overlook. But God keeps showing up, not in the grand gestures, but in the quiet ones. In Malcolm's persistence, in Barry's prayer meetings, in Lee's smile at reception, laughter over football, badminton, a conversation that starts about AI and ends in the mystery of grace. The gospel I'm learning, it doesn't need perfect conditions. It just needs people willing to start in the middle, leave a bit of space for the unplanned, where the Spirit can breathe. So if there is a call in this, it's not to build something impressive, it's simply to notice, to see where God's already moving in the places we normally rush past, to be curious, to be present, and to trust that our half-finished work can carry his fingerprints. Because I think when we do that, if we live as if every conversation might be an opportunity not to converse, but to understand that when we see people as loved by God and we love them in the same way that God loves them, that's when change happens. And I think that's what it means to be salt and light, not to stand apart, but to bring flavor and warmth to the world where we are, to trust that the Spirit's fill the gaps. So maybe this morning there's a small thing that you can offer back to God. I don't know, the place where you spend your Mondays, the people you see every day, The meetings, the spreadsheets, lunch queues, and just because there's paid work, all of us are doing some form of work, paid or unpaid. Our Mondays are filled with some form of work. But what are we doing on those Mondays? And I don't think those are distractions from faith, but the places of God is waiting for you. So maybe you could just ask, Lord, where are you already at work in my ordinary? Because I think he's already there. We just need to notice. So I'm going to ask the band if they want to come up and bring another song, and I'm going to pray for us. And you can maybe take that time while I'm praying to think about what Monday looks like. What's that ordinary that you've got in front of you that you want to give to God, and how you can be present. Lord Jesus, thank you so much for our Mondays and our Tuesdays and our Wednesdays. I thank you for the ordinary and the boring, and that you are never bored of those things that are ordinary, that you are excited and filled with joy at those small, tiny interactions, and they're never tiny, that you care about every one of us and every single one of those conversations we have, those moments of love and those connections that we have, that you care as much about five-a-side football as you do a time when you're sat grieving with somebody, that you are with us in each of those. And I pray that you help us to just trust you more and more, that you are already going ahead of us. Give us that trust, and as you give that to us, help us to just offer you our Mondays, our Tuesdays. Amen.